Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mark's Backyard Birds. Today, the guest of honor is the ruby-throated hummingbird. Now, we promised a lot of fun facts today that you may or may not be aware of. But I've covered ruby-throated hummingbirds and other hummingbirds in videos, but I kind of have mashed them together with just simple facts and several of them about these fascinating birds. Why did I choose the ruby-throated hummingbird? Well, it is the most easily the most widespread hummingbird of in North America. Here's the range map. It shows the eastern half, especially on that, and it fingering west up there. So this by far is the largest most wide-ranging hummingbird in North America. Many of the western hummingbirds just reach up to certain areas. So the ruby-throat is to me is just the logical place to start. So there's so many fascinating things about it, and people get asked me all the time about things like, well, how big are they? Well, how much they weigh? Put a penny in your hand and you're holding a hummingbird. That's basically how much they weigh. And everybody says, oh my gosh, their wing beats are crazy. How I can't even see them. Well, the wing beats on the ruby-throated hummingbird is 53 times per second. You are talking about very, very fast. And with that, you have to have a supply the oxygen, the blood needed to fuel those muscles. And so their heart rate is 40 beats per second. So they are really pumping the blood to the function to fuel those muscles of that wing beat. And the crazy thing about their wing beat, most birds, like, well, what are we going to do here? Most birds flap their wings like normal. Hummingbirds flap their wings in a figure-8 style. And they're always generating lift, which is super cool. Where most birds are only generating lift when they push down. Well, hummingbirds, no matter which way they're moving, they are generating lift. That is why they are able to fly so many different ways. They can fly forward. They can fly. They're the only birds that can fly backwards. They can fly, yeah, right, obviously right and left. They're incredible, and they're pretty fast. They're one of the faster birds in North America, 25 to 30 miles per hour, and that is really, really fast. But one of the most amazing things about them being able to fly that fast is they can go from full speed to a complete stop instantly. It's like where most birds have to slow down, not hummingbirds. I mean, they are just incredibly agile when they're moving all around like that. Well, with that, of course, that heartbeat, like a lot of birds, their body temperature is elevated. 102 degrees is what their body temperature typically is, and they, like I said, that costs a lot of energy when you're doing that. So, and with a heart rate as high as 40 beats per second, you would definitely starve to death if you had to sleep for several hours because they're just burning through energy. So what hummingbirds do to keep from starving to death while they're sleeping at night is they can lower their heart rate to down to bare minimum. Instead of 40 beats per second, it's more like 40 beats per minute. And so that way they're not burning so much energy there while they're roosting on a limb somewhere, and the feet lock like other birds around the limbs with their weight on it, so they don't have to worry about falling off the limb whenever they're asleep. So it's called torpor, a state of torpor, when they can lower their heart rate, in other words, and lower their energy use so then they can make it to morning, and then when they get back up, they can start feeding again and start building up that energy. It's pretty cool. Several years ago, when I was at Baroque Woods Nature Center here in Kansas City, a lady called and asked me, she said, do hummingbirds have legs? And of course, immediately, your first instinct is, yeah, it's silly. Of course they do. But when you think about it, and I hope you can see this, that the legs in this photograph here, they're a little bit down below the body. They have extremely short legs, and that is it. For biology purposes, that's significant. They can't walk. So, but what they do, and you see them on a hummingbird feeder, they'll actually uh, they'll scoot, but they'll use their wings to kind of give them lift so they can scoot down. But they cannot, climb or they cannot walk on the ground, things like that. So those extremely short legs. So yes, while and they can appear not to have legs when they've got their legs all folded up and you're seeing them in flight, and because they don't, I always say Mother Nature doesn't give them perch flowers, so they can't. They're usually not perched when they're feeding in nature, but perches on a hummingbird feeder or a hummingbird swing, you can see them sitting and to see the legs there. So now for the nesting. They got lots of questions about their nest. One male hummingbird, and yes, the male has the red throat. It's called a gorget, and it is not always bright red. And that's another biological thing that's really interesting. It is actually the bending of light that you get to see the red. A lot of times when you're looking at a male ruby throat, you see it looks this. It looks very dark and black. And one of the most common birds that people will ask about are black-chinned hummingbirds because they have black throats, but they also have that ring of purple underneath there. So this is they're very confused, same size, everything. But if you give a ruby-throated hummingbird time enough to turn, all of a sudden you'll see that red light come on because, like I said, it has to have the right angle, the right light to hit it to give you that beautiful red gorget that you're seeing. So one male hummingbird can have a harem of up to 9 females nesting around his territory, which is pretty funny because, of course, the females are the white chest, no red gorget, and the green back. Nice, like that. And so his job, it's called resource defense polygyny. He defends a dependable food source, your hummingbird feeders, a great patch of flowering wildflowers, a mimosa tree that blooms a lot, things like that. They'll defend that and they'll chase those females around, and they'll also do a mating dance, which they'll be high above the female, sometimes 50 feet in the air above the female, and she'll be perched somewhere down below, and he comes down and does this big U-shaped dance for her, and at the courtship. And so, and of course, he tends to not let them feed at his feeder or feeding station. It's what he tries to do until they mate with him. Well, once they do, and the females mate with him, then they move off, and the females do all of the work when it comes to the nesting and the baby rearing young. They build the nest, and nests are almost always on a real thin limb. And this is a great picture of one on a thin limb. But they also always have leaves and stuff over the nest to protect it from rain. So they'll be on a small limb underneath a bigger limb usually, and they build the nest out of spider silk, spider webs, and they use lichen and moss, little pieces of moss for camouflage. But what they do, one of the incredibly fun facts about them is when the female's gathering the spider webs to build her nest, she'll often take them and attach them to her chest. They'll stick to her chest, and she'll have stuck to her bill, and she'll go back, and that's what she uses to start weaving and weaving and weaving, and they build that nest up. Well, of course, the nests are tiny, but one of the things that they do is she compresses the nest around the top, and she may even use some sap to make it a little harder, but she wants the body of the nest to be very pliable, because when those babies are growing, they get bigger and bigger, and that nest can expand with them, which is really a great adaptation. So the moss and the lichen on the outside, like I say, they think sure that's camouflage to help it blend in with the tree better, and it's great. And usually there's 1 to 2 to 3, maybe usually 2 eggs in a nest, and the eggs are so tiny. I saw one description from Audubon who said, magazine that said, if you've got a dime and look at the face of on the dime, it's about that size. And that, they say jelly beans, some say big peas, but yes, they're obviously very, very small. And they are the smallest birds in North America. So, they're going to have the smallest eggs in North America, and that's for sure. I think the dimensions for eggs are about a half an inch long to about 1/3 of an inch wide, and so if that helps you with that dimension. But they are very small. But the female does all the incubation. Male does nothing after the mating part of it, and so she does all the incubation. And how many nests per season? 1 to 2. In some areas, and if conditions are favorable, often 2. but it depends on where you live. If they're further north and you don't have as long a nesting season, and if food availability, it may only be one. So what do they eat? What do they favor? Well, they favor slender, tubular red flowers. And you can see their bill is made for that. Their tongue is made. And remember, their tongue, they lap like a dog. They don't drink like a straw with that bill, which a lot of people think. They literally lap like a dog. And at the end of the tongue, there are tiny, tiny flaps that open up. So when the tongue darts into the flower or your hummingbird feeders, those flaps come out and they pull the nectar back to them. And that's how they mainly eat. But they do eat insects. A lot of people think, well, they only drink sugar water or flowers, but no, they do eat insects. They snap them out of the air, small insects like fruit flies and things, because they have to feed their babies insects. Like almost all birds, they need that source of calcium for the growing bones of those baby birds. So yes, they're eating lots of flower nectar in the wild, and they're all they've while red is their preferred color. Why is that? Well, that's because bees can't see the color red. And so they're not attracted to red flowers. And so there's more likely to be nectar there. And of course, the tubular shape, it helps influence what the hummingbirds like as well. But while bees will nectar on the other end of the spectrum, the blues and the greens and and even yellows, well, oranges and reds, they don't see. And so they're not attracted to that. So now, if they see something nectaring on a red flower, would they come feed from it? Yes, that's kind of what happens with hummingbird feeders. But for the most part, that's why we quit putting yellow on hummingbird feeders years and years ago, is because of that. The bees would zero in on that yellow color where they can't see the red. So if you leave the yellow off of it, then you've got a more reliable bee-proof hummingbird feeder. So and here's a great illustration of that tongue. I hope you can see it. I'm going to zoom this up a little bit bigger. Let's see. Let's go with this one. And hopefully you can see that tongue is longer than the bill. And where do they keep all that tongue when it's not out? They actually store it on the top of their head. They have a muscle in the back of their throat that pulls the tongue up onto the top of the hummingbird's head, under the skin, of course, on the outside of the skull, of course, and then it darts back in. It's pretty cool. They're great. Woodpeckers have a very similar adaptation to that. So as for hummingbird populations, ruby-throated hummingbirds, very good news. Some people ask me, I heard they're endangered. I heard it. No. Ruby-throated hummingbirds are probably more common now than they've ever been. Their populations have been increasing since the 60s easily, and hummingbird feeders have a lot to do with that. When people are critical about feeding birds, this is a prime example how hummingbird feeders have positively influenced bird populations of ruby-throated hummingbird. And we know the male, we talked earlier about the red throat and the green back, and the female, this is a beautiful female, the white throat and white belly, green on the back. Well, the juveniles, which will start showing up in July, mid-July, and you can tell them, this was a great picture of that. If you can see toward the back to the rump and up the back and on the sides of the wings, so this is a juvenile ruby-throated hummingbird. They're much like females, except their chest is not brilliant white like the adult females are. So it's kind of a dull white, and on the back you get a model of gray and green until they molt into that full green back. So that's an easy way to tell a juvenile hummingbird in July, August, September, in that time period when they're going on. And one of the best things you can do for hummingbirds is, of course, landscape with native wildflowers. This is my particular favorite plant to landscape with for hummingbirds, and this is cardinal flower, and they absolutely love it. So that will definitely supplement your hummingbird feeders. Remember, 4 parts water to 1 part sugar. You do not need red color in your hummingbird feeders. I always say, have you ever seen a hummingbird go up to your feeder and stick his eye to the hole and see what color the nectar is? No, they don't know what that sugar water looks like in there. They're drawn to the flower, the feeders on top, and drink from that. So you don't have to add the red color, especially if it's a chemical dye red color. But they'll be coming in good numbers. Right now, we're in the middle of nesting. It's the early June, and so the activity may be a little slow for you right now. They may not have any activity at all. But remember, put your hummingbird feeders up by the end of July. Just put a little bit in it at first until you see them coming, because you're going to have to toss that out every couple of days when the weather's really, really hot. So we care about the health of our hummingbirds. We want to take care of them. So it's a great idea for a program. I hope you enjoyed learning some fun facts about hummingbirds and how fascinating they are, especially and in this case, the ruby-throated hummingbird. Like I said, it applies to many of the hummingbirds themselves. So if you have ideas for future programs, please send them in. If you would, like the video, share it with your friends if you think they'd enjoy it. Until next time, let's talk birds.